You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast.
I grew up with a strong belief and the strong motivation to get my roots back in Africa and build businesses that could have an impact. Throughout my career, I tried to get to understand how governmental money and private money could collaborate and could be put in the pools and funds that could finance SMEs. If we want to be able to achieve our global goals for climate change, we need to ensure that our smallest, most excluded SMEs get access to the financing that they need to become part of the African Green Revolution, in my perspective.
Stay tuned as we bring you inspiring people who are unlocking Africa's economic potential. You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast with your host, Tessa Adamu.
Welcome to the Unlocking Africa podcast, where we find inspirational people who are doing inspirational things to unlock Africa's economic potential. Today, we have Mélanie Keïta, who is CEO of Melanin Kapital, which is a last-mile carbon financing platform for African SMEs that helps SMEs access green equipment faster and cheaper by using carbon credits and climate financing. Welcome to the podcast, Mélanie. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very good. Thank you so much. Calling you from Nairobi, Kenya, and everything is sunny and shiny here. So very happy to be here. Thanks again for having me.
Oh, I'm jealous. It's not so shiny here.
Can imagine.
I'm not sure if you've listened to the podcast before. I usually like to start from the beginning. So please introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about Mélanie Keïta.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So my name is Mélanie Keïta Mariam. I am originally from France and Congo. My father is Malian Congolese, but grew up in Congo, and my mom is French, German, but grew up in France. And I grew up in France myself. I grew up with a strong belief and the strong motivation to actually get my roots back in Africa and build businesses that could have an impact, not only for me, but for my family in Congo, Gabon, Senegal, and Mali. So my idea was to start first with finance. So I studied corporate finance first to understand how companies were invested in, what kind of access to finance was available globally, and then more specifically in Africa. I started my career in impact investment funds from France, then a bit closer to the continent in Kenya, and finally from Germany. Throughout my career, I basically tried to also get to understand how governmental money and private money could collaborate and could be put in the pools and funds that could finance SMEs, either directly or indirectly through banks and microfinance institutions. And after working in that space for quite some time, I decided to start my own company, Melanin Kapital, as a fintech, to show that with digitization and leveraging on new technologies, we could reduce the transaction cost of the process and find innovative ways to finance very, very small companies. Because the biggest challenge that I faced throughout my career was to be able to channel all this pool of money available towards the businesses that were the smallest and the most excluded from the financial sector. So that's why we created Melanin Kapital, initially as a crowdfunding platform, then as a lending platform where banks could also plug in. And as we grew and learned more about what were the needs of SMEs and where the most affordable financing was, we actually pivoted towards climate, because we realized that not only it's a necessity for the continent, for the world, but also it's a huge opportunity for African SMEs to get access to more affordable financing and get access to carbon credits that would be much more attractive type of financing that's what is currently in the market. So we focused on financing for SMEs assets that could generate for them carbon credits. And currently we are doing our first pilots in Kenya always in collaboration with ABSA Bank and the African Guarantee Fund, but just with this time our own abilities to buy equipment for those SMEs and have them pay us in installments. So that's basically the whole story of myself and how Melanin Kapital came to life.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Melanie. So you've given us great overview of who you are, your journey in the world of finance, and what led you to start Melanin Kapital. So you are the CEO of Melanin Kapital. So I was hoping you could tell us a bit more about the company, the platform, and the work that you are currently doing in Africa.
Sure. So to give you a bigger overview now, we have a technology team of 5 people who are working on different features and innovation of the platform. Through our platform, we are fully digitizing the green lending process from digital KYC, meaning how we check your identity, through national identifications, through also business licensing and tax compliance. So that's the first step. The second step is the credit scoring. We've developed our own proprietary algorithm that basically scores SMEs based on their cash flows. So based on the mobile money statements or the financial statements that they share with us, and basically the capability of paying back the equipment in installments. So after this step of credit scoring, the platform also digitizes the entire disbursement process and repayment process from the SME perspective, either through our application or through USSD. And finally, the platform also offers a range of capacity building services to help SMEs understand how they can go greener and earn more thanks to this green aspect. So there's an online training module where they learn a little bit more about that through very short lessons from partners. Then they have also access to a networking module where they can network with each other and share tips and basically embrace peer-to-peer learning to go into their greening journey. This platform is also something that we share and sell to banks. So ABSA Bank Kenya already used our platform to be able to do their own green lending to SMEs. And we are now scaling up also that software as a service product so that we can work with more banks and then channel more lending towards SMEs on the continent. So far, we have 600 SMEs that have been coming into our platform, and we are currently expanding with the objective this year of financing $1 million of green equipment and onboarding 1,500 SMEs. The goal is for them to be able to acquire equipment that can help them scale, but at the same time reduce CO2. So the equipment we're trying to finance are for 3 different types of SMEs. First one is the farms, where we are financing greenhouses, solar irrigations, even solar computers, solar cooling storages. Then for the logistics companies, we are financing the greening of their fleet and solar charging stations. And finally, for the small distributors and retailers or informal restaurants, we finance solar freezers or fridges and solar point of sales devices. So the goal here is really to try to green the entire food economy value chain, because it's the largest value chain on our continent. It's also the one that creates the most jobs. So if we manage to scale the small businesses in that value chain, we manage to not only reduce the CO2, but also create sustainable job opportunities for the local communities. So that's the entire vision and work that we're doing locally.
Very impressive. You mentioned some of the functionalities of the platform, such as the scoring system, KYC, and capacity building services for the SMEs. So if we look at the SMEs, what are some of the biggest challenges that African SMEs face when it comes to accessing green equipment and financing for projects?
I think we could spend an entire day talking about that.
But very true.
But basically, I think if we start from even the raison d'être of Melanin Capital was this challenge of access to finance. So what we realized is across the board, SMEs are struggling to get access to finance first because they also don't necessarily understand what are the different steps of getting access to finance. And so that's why when we even started Melanin Capital, we also started with a foundation, the Tungane Foundation, that was now providing content, training contents and programs where they could understand the steps of getting access to finance. So the kind of documents that were required, the kind of level of revenues that were required for the certain type of funding, the options that were available, the mistakes that they should avoid, and so on. So that's the first point, is understanding of getting access to finance. For those who are already past that step, the issues are usually for SMEs an issue regarding working capital, access to working capital, to be able to sell more basically of what they have as produce, or access to equipment capital. Especially what we see as a huge issue is access to capital to get machines so that they can bring value addition. And it's very challenging because to get machines that are coming from China, it has a huge delay. And that's why a lot of banks and other financial providers are not into that. So for us, when we saw this aspect, we decided to focus on the equipment capital needs, because we thought that was also the best product that could help us reduce and mitigate climate change. Since what we're saying is that for an SME to industrialize, they have to pollute more unless they industrialize with green equipment. So now we're trying to get them access to the financing that they need to invest in the green equipment. And what we saw as issues is first also an awareness issue. So seeing what are the different green equipment options, what are the different upsides of going solar or going electric for the vehicles, and how do you cover the upfront costs that is usually high, and that's why financing is important, but over time helps you to save cost on electricity and on maintenance and so on. So those challenges that we're trying to solve also with different marketing and training capacities is that lack of awareness, and then coming in with a type of financing that can help the SMEs to get access to the equipment without defaulting and with the capabilities of growing their businesses.
Thank you for that. So you've detailed a range of challenges that African SMEs face and the solutions that you put in place to overcome some of these challenges. So if we look at it from a different perspective, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've faced setting up the platform and the fund?
Yeah, very good question. So there are different challenges. So I'll start from the beginning. When we started with the idea, the first challenge was how we're going to build that platform, because my co-founder is an engineer, but he's not a coding engineer. So he knew what kind of equipment the SMEs needed and so on, but we didn't know how to code. So then we thought that we had to hire a CTO. And then when you don't have money yourself as a startup, it's very difficult to hire someone that would be worth a couple of thousands or dozens of thousands of dollars every month. So the first thing that we had to do was bootstrapping. And we did this by doing also some things maybe less conventional that investors would usually see as not necessarily the right route, because in an ideal scenario, you have a team where you have a CTO that comes for free, they just take shares and they build the product together, right? But it's the case for many, many, many startups that you do not have that talent and you have to find this money somewhere. So we started with what we had, which was the expertise around entrepreneurship and finance in Africa. And we started with trainings and we started with advisory programs and fundraising programs. That's how Tungane Foundation was born. So with those programs, we managed to do a first pilot showcasing that we could support SMEs, 10 SMEs. And then from there, we got contracts from government organizations that helped us to generate the revenue we needed to now start recruiting some technology developers, very junior at the beginning, because we still could not afford a full-time CTO. Once we got those junior talents, we started by building a minimum viable product. And the second challenge now that we're facing is actually designing that minimum product feature. So at the very beginning, you come with an idea, you want to do everything at once, you want all the features, and you're building something that is way too big and actually that is not fulfilling the functionalities that will help you to make money. That's exactly what we did. So the minimum features that we had were actually the capacity building features, which were not necessarily the features that would have helped us to do the financing. So we managed to still do a few pilots, especially with APSA, which helped us to see what were the pinpoints when it comes to online training and online networking that SMEs would need regarding green lending. But yeah, it was a very big challenge to be able to also be mentored by the right product developers that could help us design the features and everything we needed, right?
Yes.
From there, the third challenge was actually adoption. So when you are building a product that also is completely new, you have to be very careful with user experience. To be fair, like the whole innovation behind is like whether you're using blockchain, artificial intelligence or whatnot, it's not as important as what the user would experience, because a bad product where the user experience is bad, it's just going to result in churn. And if people churn, so that means they leave your platform and they leave your product, it costs so much to then find new users and having them. So the third challenge was then to be able to find the right UI UX designer that could also help us to design the best experience possible and simplify the process of green lending application as much as possible. And this is what we managed to cope. And now today, by going live with much more SMEs, we are hoping that we'll be able to collect enough data and feedback so that the product is as smooth as possible. But it's still a work in progress.
Brilliant. So you detailed the steps that you've taken to overcome the limitations that you initially had as a startup. Has this impacted or limited the number of African markets that you're currently active in?
Yeah, I think it's always difficult to scale at the beginning in new markets when if you don't have like a product that is really stable. So it's something that I learned also during the Techstars program that we did last year in Berlin.
Yes.
It's very interesting because they invited an entrepreneur who was telling us about his journey of raising too fast and then trying to scale too fast with a product that is not achieved product market fit. And basically he lost the company in the sense that he had to sell the company like 5 years down the line because they were really struggling to then raise based on a product that was not really achieving that fit with the customer. So I think like, because especially on the fintech side, you have a lot in terms of regulations. You have to adapt to different regulations per countries, and the marketing and the whole experience is a bit different, whether you are a Kenyan SME that wants to get green lending or you are a Senegalese SME, right? Why? Because typically in Senegal, there's not as many motorcycle drivers. So the electric Boda product that we have would not be our main product in Senegal compared to Kenya. And then in Kenya, we call a lot of our green financing Kijani, because Kijani means green in Kiswahili. Then you come to Senegal or Cote d'Ivoire or Benin, then you have to change to the local language, right? So
yes,
it's a lot of adaptation in the product itself, with the language, with the cultural, let's say, aspects of your products and so on. So yes, it definitely limits at the very beginning how you expand into new markets.
So which African markets are you currently active in?
So currently we are active in Kenya. We are looking at expanding to Uganda and Rwanda with our equipment vendors because they are already in those countries. So we will finance their clients in those countries. So not actively marketing outside the Melanin Kapital product, but really trying to collect data and feedback from already the existing clients of those vendors. So clients that would need a buy now, pay later facility. But yeah, for now, our main market is Kenya.
Brilliant. So you're very deliberate about your growth and venturing into new markets.
Yes.
So within Kenya, where you are active, how do SMEs find out about your service and what you're doing?
So at the moment, because when you promote a financial product in Kenya, there's already always a lot of people that come knock at your door. At the moment, we work within close pilots with our equipment vendor partners and our banking partners. So we work with specific calls when we call SMEs to sign up. So currently we have 550 SMEs that have signed up for the new pilot. And we'll do another one in September. So they can still find us on social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And we have a website that is now currently being revamped, www.melaninkapital.com, capital with a K. But we are still, let's say, taking a lot of people on the waiting list because of those closed pilot strategy that we have.
Brilliant. Thank you, Melanie. Earlier on, you mentioned the platform scoring system and KYC. So I was wondering if we can go into more detail regarding your process of evaluating whether or not an SME is eligible for your services.
Mm-hmm. The first step is always, as I mentioned, KYC, because you have to make sure that the SME is existing. So there's a lot of informal businesses we are financing, but even if you're informal, which means you don't have a registration certificate, you usually at least have a business license. So something that allows you to operate where you're operating, for example, as a kiosk, as a store, or as a boda boda. So that's the first step, is to make sure that the owners of those SMEs are real, that they are not in any terrorist or money laundering lists, that the business is allowed to operate. Then the second condition is now going into the credit scoring. The SMEs need to have a certain score, which is a minimum score internally, and that score is calculated based on mainly the ability to repay and the behavior in terms of spending. So of course we're looking at whether the SME is using a lot of money to bet or to gamble, and what kind of average balance there is on the account on a monthly basis, so that we can estimate how much could be the maximum and the minimum that they can pay back every month. So those are the key criteria. Obviously, the main criteria is also for them to go for a green equipment. We don't finance anything that would be polluting. So that's the big barrier to financing. But other than that, we have a couple of excluded sectors such as tobacco, bets, gambling, and mining, but and prostitution, obviously, etc. But otherwise, even if we have a strong focus on the food value chain, we do look at other industries.
So I guess once you've determined an SME is eligible, the aim is to help these SMEs access green equipment faster and cheaper by using carbon credits and climate finance. So people who are listening who don't quite understand what that means, how does Melanin Capital leverage carbon credits and climate financing to help these SMEs to access the funding that they need?
So when it comes to climate finance, we connect with financial providers that focus on climate. So we are basically the ones that take the pool of financing on the Melanin Capital, be it from local banks, from international donors. Even very soon, as we are trying to get regulated for that, we'll try to even have retail investors like you and me that contribute to certain type of pool of financing. For the carbon credits, this is still a work in progress. We're currently certifying the methodology that we have for carbon tracking so that we can basically be able to go to corporates and companies who aggregate offsets of carbon to then be able to sell to them carbon credits. So that's basically what we'll be doing. That's the big innovation, because then we'll be able to aggregate thousands of small businesses that are saving CO2 and give them access to carbon credits that they would not have access to if they were just doing it by themselves.
Brilliant, brilliant. I read somewhere that the overall aim is to become the leading fintech platform driving, was it $1 billion of credit financing to the green transition of businesses in Africa? So that's a great ambition. How close are you to achieving this goal?
We still have a decade in front of us to achieve it, but for now we're starting with 1 million this year, so let's see how far it gets us as a pilot.
I'm sure you'll get there sooner rather than later. So fantastic. It's great to have that ambition, and it's very realistic. So I guess, as you mentioned, you're starting with the £1 million fund. So can you share some of the success stories of SMEs that have benefited from Melanin Capital services?
At the moment, we are really at the infancy, let's say, for the financing part for equipment. But what we have done so far is especially trying to connect them to local banks and also help them understand how greening can be a benefit for them. And those stories are usually on our website, where we share, for example, small businesses in the farming industry mostly that have learned more about that and trying to have access working capital loans thanks to the training, but now looking at getting access to equipment financing through us. We hope to be able to share more in the next 2 months.
Brilliant. It's clear that you have great passion for what you do, and what you plan to do in the future will have a huge impact on the continent. So looking at that, what role do you see last mile financing playing in achieving, say, the sustainable development goals and addressing some of the climate challenges that we do have on the continent?
Yes, well, for me, especially for SDG 13 on climate action, SDG 12 on sustainable consumption and production, I think it's key to focus on the last mile financing, which means like financing businesses that are a bit more in rural areas and smaller, and that don't necessarily have direct access to all the services that larger urban SMEs would have. And the reason for that is because the majority of our economic system is composed of very small businesses, and especially agricultural and rural businesses. So if we don't find a way to help those businesses modernize, scale, produce better, and earn more money to basically provide better job opportunities locally, we will struggle to actually reduce the GHG emissions to the point that we meet the Paris Agreement in 2030. So we absolutely need to be able to provide that financing, especially the green financing, because if we continue the way that it is, and with the population growth that Africa is going to experience, would need to basically like quintuple the use of energy and the manufacturing capacities of our SMEs, which will ultimately bring more than 12 gigatons of CO2 into the atmosphere and will make Africa contribute to a fifth of the emissions of the world. So if we want to be able to achieve our global goals for climate change, we need to ensure that our smallest SMEs and our most excluded SMEs get access to the capacity and financing that they need to become part of the African Green Revolution, in my perspective.
Thank you for sharing that, Melanie. Obviously, you're doing some amazing work with regards to green financing, but the continent is a big place and it requires a joint effort from a large number of people. So what advice would you give to other entrepreneurs who are looking to drive sustainable innovation and impact in their business?
Good question. The first two main advice. The first one is to get started.
Brilliant.
Yes, there's a lot of entrepreneurs that have great ideas for their communities, but they don't get started because either they don't have the confidence, or they find it too small, or they're not sure if it will have the impact that they want. We sometimes want to achieve too big too fast. And honestly, everything needs to grow step by step. At the beginning of Melanin Capital, I was still even working because it could not be a big hit at the beginning. We had to learn a lot. We had to experience, and we had to make mistakes, do things that were not useful for anybody, create things that were more useful, and so on. So it's important to start, and to start imperfectly, to start messy, but to start with what you think is what is needed, and then slowly you'll get there. Because if you solve a dire problem that your community is having, you will definitely create a sustainable business locally. Then the second advice is also to start building a network of like-minded sustainable entrepreneurs in the market that will help you to learn faster, will show you a bit the path. Reason being, especially in East Africa, I think, but also in other West African countries like Nigeria, Benin, Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, and so on. There's already now a community of entrepreneurs who have managed to create businesses in the sustainability fields, either climate or social changes. And they are either becoming mentors or investors in the field of sustainability. So it's always good to have them around you and learn from them, because it's not really about just your journey on your own. You need to be able to find allies and people that can show you the way, because it's a very, very difficult, long and challenging journey. So it's better to have a lot of people around. Maybe I forgot that third one, but a third advice is to find also a strong co-founder. Do not do it alone. It's very important to have a team to be able to deliver on a product, especially because, as I said, otherwise it's very, very lonely and it's very tough to go by yourself. And also because investors hate investing in teams of just one co-founder. So it's great to find one co-founder at least, or maybe two co-founders that can complement your skills, can complement your character, and can help you deliver the best product possible. So those are my 3 advice.
Thank you for sharing that advice, Melanie. Fantastic. So I'm sure there are people listening who will be extremely interested in what you're doing. So how can listeners get involved and support the work of Melanin Capital and other organizations who are working towards sustainable finance and climate action?
So thank you for this opportunity of sharing this. Basically, either there's a possibility to directly contact me from LinkedIn, Mélanie Keïta Mariam, or currently, if you are an entrepreneur that is looking to go green, then you can visit our website and sign up for our platform. If you are a bank who wants to lend to entrepreneurs to go green, then we have also a product for you. So love to get in touch also via email with melanie.keita@melanincapital.com. And if you are a donor or an international finance corporation, we would love to also work and collaborate into those different financing. Lately, we've also collaborated a lot with corporates. So especially for corporates who want to green their operation and finance the climate action of their SMEs in the value chain, get in touch also via email, melanie.keita@melanincapital.com. Love to discuss and see how we can partner and collaborate for a greener Africa together.
So you mentioned some of your current partnerships and collaborations which have enabled you to do what you're doing. So how key has partnership been in enabling you to grow the company?
I mean, partnerships are everything, especially when you are a small startup, especially if you have corporate partners or governmental partners. They have the financial muscles to buy from you or give you the capacity so that you can expand. So for us, the anchor partnership we had was with ABSA, which means that we had the potential to work and advertise with them. So that was the first thing, to get SMEs into our platform. And then we got the guidance from the teams about what they were expecting so that we could refine our product. So yeah, I would really always advise the startup that first and foremost, the big objective when you start a business is not necessarily to get access to investments, but to first start with building revenues, building strong partnerships that will create credibility for your business and that can help you get towards the traction that will make you a very attractive investment down the line. So that's the advice I usually give, and that's how I think that partnerships are very key for startups at the beginning.
Brilliant. So you detail the importance of partnerships such as the one that you have with the likes of ABSA that have enabled you to grow and gain traction. So if you look at the climate finance space, which areas in that space are you seeing that are gaining traction, that you're quite excited or interested in?
I think on the climate finance part, there was from before a lot of interest into solar systems leasing, which is now coming down because of the difficulty maybe of doing this in rural areas and so on, and the large non-performing loans. So now what we see in the climate finance space, mostly we see a lot of marketplaces, but also a lot of nature-based financing. So a lot of investment towards nature-based solutions on the continent. So everything from forestry to carbon sequestration and so on. So I think this is very exciting, the same way that even carbon credit financing for forest or for landowners are. I think that's something that is being developed, a bit costly, of course, for the startups that help the landowners to get certified, but slowly we're getting to the stage where Africa's natural assets are being a source of revenues for local communities. And I think that is very exciting.
Fantastic. So you detailed some of the areas that are gaining traction that you're excited about, which will have positive impact in Africa. So if you look forward, future of Africa, where do you see the climate finance space in Africa in 5 years' time?
I think that in my perspective, 5 years is a bit short, but in the next maybe 20, 30 years, I believe that green finance will be the norm. That's, for me, I think green finance is the future of especially SME financing, because there is a step that we can skip towards industrialization as Africans, which is instead of going through the full polluting aspects of industrialization, we can directly go towards green manufacturing and green growth. And that means that most of the financing that will come from that will be green as well. And that a lot of green bonds and offer towards green financing will go towards the African continent that has the biggest assets compared to the rest of the world, from the unlimited amount of solar energy to also the great amount of forest lands and wetlands and so on. So there's a huge opportunity in my perspective for most of the financial institutions on the continent to focus on green lending and green financing in general, and for African continents to refinance themselves with green bonds and carbon credits, which will overall reduce considerably the cost of financing, which is an issue even at government level for our countries.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. So if we look closer to home, where do you see yourself and Melanin Kapital in 5 years' time? How close will you be to your $1 billion goal?
Yeah, I hope that in the next 5 years, we'll already be halfway to that $1 billion goal. Our objective then will be to be fully focused on the carbon financing aspects more than the green lending aspects, and mostly to plug our algorithm and our platform to existing lenders so that we can be the go-to platform for carbon financing and rewarding all the SMEs and larger companies that are going green thanks to green carbon credits sourcing. So that's where we hope to be. And I'm sure we'll have a discussion in 5 years to see where we are.
I hope so too. It's a great vision and one that I hope to see you achieve. So when all is said and done, what kind of legacy or footprint do you hope to leave in Africa?
Yeah, I hope that what will be remembered from will be that we reduced considerably the CO2 emissions. Our goal is to reduce by at least 15 million tons in the next 5 years. So we hope that this would be what we what we live, but also leaving the legacy of revolutionizing and changing the way finance is done on the continent, doing it through a green lens instead of a binary lens like it has been done across the globe, but having our own adapted way of financing our economy through a triple bottom line approach instead of just a profit bottom line approach.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant.
Quote of the week.
As people, we often have quotes, mantras, African proverbs, or affirmations that keep us going when times are challenging or when times are good. Do you have one that you can share with us today?
A quote that I always have in mind, it's the one from Mandela, which says, "Everything is impossible until it's done." That's actually a quote that hangs over my bed. And it's because I've always been told since I'm very young that whatever I wanted to do was impossible. I wanted to go to the French championship of horse riding, for instance, the ones of chess. Everyone said to me it was impossible, and we did it.
Oh, wow.
I wanted to create the largest association of my business school. Everyone thought it was impossible to have a woman there, and we did it. Same for Melanin Kapital. When I started, even my own colleagues were telling me it's impossible. But for now, we're still doing it. We're still alive. So I think that quote from Mandela was really, really strong, because our human minds are always limited, but what our minds and our thoughts can imagine. But once we see it being done, then that's where we unlock that impossibility. And I think it's always important for us to remember that we can do everything, especially as Africans. We are able and we are capable of doing anything and revolutionizing everything. So we have to do it and show the world that it can be possible.
What an amazing way to come to the end of today's conversation. Fantastic quote, and it's clear that you live by that quote.
Happy it came clearly.
So. Fantastic. So, as we've come to the close of today's conversation, I was wondering if you had any closing remarks, final calls to action for people who are interested in the work that you're doing.
No closing remark. Thank you so much for having me, and hope to be in contact with anyone interested in financing climate action in Africa. And we need as many players and as many ideas possible. So it's still a very big market, very big continent, very big problem. So let's all join forces to solve it. Thank you so much for having me again today.
Thank you, Mélanie, for joining me on the podcast. That has been an awesome conversation. You've created an exciting company and financial product, which I believe has the potential of being a game changer on the continent. So looking forward to seeing how things develop. So, yep, well done to you and your team.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for the support.
No problem.
All the best.
Fantastic. And we will speak soon, Mélanie.
Yes, speak soon. Have a great day.
Bye-bye. Take care.
You too.
Thank you to everyone who has listened and stayed tuned to the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, or tell a friend about it. You can also rate, review us in Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcast. Thank you, and see you next week for the Unlocking Africa podcast.